I'm Paul Pearson, host of Star Time, and when I'm not hearing men compare women to residential real estate, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
You probably have questions about COVID vaccines. Here are some answers about how they're being made.
How are COVID vaccines being produced faster?
Usually, vaccine testing and production are separate steps. But because of the pandemic, vaccines are being developed on parallel tracks. So both steps are happening just at the same time.
How are the vaccines being tested?
Right now, several different COVID vaccines are in testing. Each go through multiple clinical trials with up to thousands of volunteers.
How do vaccines get approved?
Not all COVID vaccine versions will make it to the final stages of testing and approval. Produced vaccines that do not pass clinical trials will be destroyed. But for those that do pass, a team of medical experts will examine test results and possible side effects. If the vaccine is effective and safe, it gets approved and gets to you. Go to covidvaccinewa.org to learn more. A message from the state of Washington.
This is Big Poppy, host of Jazz from the Cabinets. Join me each week for a listening tour of the first century of jazz, an eclectic mix of Dixieland, big band, cool jazz, bebop, contemporary jazz, world jazz, all jazz in all forms. That's Jazz from the Cabinets with Big Poppy on Rainier Avenue Radio, streaming worldwide on RainierAvenueRadio.world.
Women Empowerment Talk Radio, your roadmap to business success. Tune in every Sunday at 3 p.m. on RainierAvenueRadio.world, providing resources and sharing motivational experiences from the everyday entrepreneur. Tune in Women Empowerment Talk Radio every Sunday, 3 p.m. on RainierAvenueRadio.world.
Salmon Homecoming is on September 17th from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. at Pier 62. Join the Salmon Homecoming Alliance in a celebration of Indigenous peoples and cultures and the importance of protecting our salmon and our environment. Featuring performances, arts and crafts, food, dancing, a canoe welcoming ceremony, and more. All are welcome to join in this 30th anniversary celebration. Visit waterfrontparkseattle.org/events to learn more about the Salmon Homecoming on September 17th.
You're listening to RainierAvenueRadio.world.
You're listening to HeartBeat Radio. I'm your host, Cindi Bright. HeartBeat Radio is a conversation aimed to take the pulse of corporate America. Opportunities for people of color, we're getting lost in the shuffle of change. I'm that provocateur of change. The hearts of corporate America are addressed. Access and opportunities will be accelerated for all people. Through HeartBeat Radio, you will gain a deeper understanding of what is necessary for change.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to HeartBeat Radio and Podcast. I am your host, Cindi Bright, and I'm excited to host the show, the conversation this evening about women in the workplace. If you heard my intro, the show is in its 5th year. We're still talking about access and opportunity for all people. Tonight, I invited a special co-host to come on with me. Her name is Stefani Coverson. She is a former HR executive, as I am, hence why I wanted to have one of my peers and colleagues on with me. She is the founder of her own consulting firm, Jamii Pae, and I'm excited to bring her on this evening with us to have a conversation about what's really going on in the workplace. So let me welcome Stefanie onto HeartBeat Radio this evening.
Hi, Cindi. Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm just so excited to be here, so thank you.
I'm happy to have you here. I'd love for you to just tell our audience first off a little bit about yourself and your background, and we can talk a little bit about how we know each other, which is not very well, but we do know each other. So let's have a conversation. Let's hear from you about your background first.
Absolutely. So I have been in the HR space for over 20 years, but have always been an advocate and champion for creating cultures of belonging. And actually, my mother was what they used to call a pluralism manager way back in the day with the phone company. And so just watching her navigate spaces as a Black woman, trying to create spaces of community for folks of color, et cetera. So, I grew up in that environment. And in my career, again, over the last 20 years, my first sort of step into the HR field was actually in compliance. So I was an investigator for the Washington State Human Rights Commission. And so I very intentionally, like my goal, I was going to eradicate discrimination, where people had fair and equal access and opportunity. And very quickly, I found that compliance is the basement, right? And so then I thought, well, if I get into HR outright, that I would be able to affect more change and again, create work environments and public spaces where everyone had equal access. And so I have spent 20 years in the HR space in both the public and nonprofit sector, higher ed. And really after, I would say probably about somewhere in mid 2020, I started having a lot of folks picking my brain about trying to help them create more equitable workplaces and how could they move their DEI and anti-racism strategy forward. And I would readily give that advice and feedback. And one day someone said, hey, you're giving away your intellectual property for free. And so you may not find, for example, somebody bringing a spreadsheet to a CFO, at happy hour saying, can I pick your brain, about our financials? Like, you should be paid for this work. And so that's when I launched my consultancy, and it took off pretty quickly. And so then I decided that I would rather do this work, my passion, my love work, full time. And so that's how I got to be here today.
And we met many years ago. You reminded me of of how we met, and was it an interview that I had with you?
It absolutely was. It was an interview, and I did all of, I think, the whole, corporate speak and, the perfect, I think, interview answers. And you played along probably for, 10 or 15 minutes. And then you finally stopped me and said, I can tell you're really prepared for this interview, but I want to know who you are and, what you're looking to do. And so that kind of opened up a whole different conversation. And I think also influenced me that, I want to be in an organization and work for a place where I sort of don't have to wear that mask, where I can actually come forward and really truly be who I am. And so
I noticed
that always makes me chuckle.
A lot of women that I've interviewed over the years, particularly Black women, have often come in with, I'll just say, the script, right? They can quote the script of how to answer the traditional questions. And I have always focused on like who people really are, because in order for anybody to be successful, they have to be able to be who they are, and they have to be open about what their needs are inside of the organization and how their leader can actually help them and navigate for them and remove obstacles for them and all of the sorts of things that I would characterize effective leaders look to do. I'm questioning, and why I invited you on to have this conversation with me tonight about the workplace. I'm asking the questions: is DEI working? What is the workforce? What is happening in the workforce right now? Now, there's some trends I know you've looked at. There's some recent, by recent I mean in the past week, some articles that have come out. I want to show a couple of them. Daniel, if we could bring up the quiet quitting one that just came out on Cairo 7 this week about, I don't know if our listeners have heard of the hashtag quiet quitting. There's a study, Washington ranks number 2 in this quiet quitting. People are walking away from their jobs. People are done and don't want to be a part of this ecosystem anymore. Is that what you observe too in your work that you're doing?
Absolutely. So I see two things happening. So the first, the great resignation, where people are walking away. I mean, I think that COVID, particularly as Black women who are the caretakers, that strong Black woman kind of trope and stereotype, but the caretakers being everything to everyone, trying to pour from an empty cup all of the time. I think that COVID, we were seeing loved ones and family members dying with all of the things left undone that they wanted to do, right? That doesn't matter what your position is, in this company or whatever it is that you're doing, once you pass on, you pass on. And is that how you really want to spend your time? I also think overlaying COVID was also this constant diet of Black trauma, seeing Black and brown people constantly being murdered by the police, assaulted, hospitalized, paralyzed, sort of all of those things. Because again, there were a lot of folks working from home. And so you're looking for information from media sources, like what's next with COVID, what's going on? Because remember that COVID was only supposed to be about 3 weeks, and then we'll be back to, business as usual. And it wasn't. And so we were all like crying for information, like what's going on, what's happening. And so this constant diet of seeing Black and brown people murdered in the street. Again, is this really how I want to spend my time at work, putting up with all of this when, I could catch COVID and pass away, or be disabled for the long term, or trying to go back and forth to work or wherever it is you're going? Like, am I going to come home safely? Is my significant other, my children coming home safely? I think it definitely forced us to re-examine and reprioritize our lives. So I think the Great Resignation was a great deal of that piece. And then just also kind of deciding, I don't want to put up with this anymore. I can get a better job. I can launch my own business. So Great Resignation in a nutshell. And then this quiet quitting, the idea that I am just going to do what is in my job description. No more, no less.
Mm-hmm.
And so
we've had people on the show, specifically Seattle Credit Union, who admirably has taken that issue on with giving people 3 and 4 multiple jobs in corporate America. And I know you've come out of the education space and the nonprofit space. In the corporate America space, you're at it, you're given more responsibilities and no added pay. Seattle Credit Union is actually doing something about it. And I love their model of a compensation structure that allows for additional compensation to come in on top of your base salary in order to at least try to take some of that sting away. Because we know, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but who does the work normally flow to? It flows to the workhorses, which are the Black women in the organization. That is what we are accustomed to being and doing. And so the pile-on mentality of giving more. I want to add and amplify, Stefanie, I don't know if you agree with this. I'll use a stronger word about putting up with things. Black women are abused in corporate America. There's no, from my perspective, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We are abused. And so I think that when people got out of the wheel that's, managers breathing down their neck, you can't do enough to please the folks, the performance management process, which is what I call the 911 system of getting rid of brown and Black people. people are done with that. And so when we look at, particularly, it's been women too, but predominantly Black women who are walking away, period, and not coming back. I think I actually pulled an article to highlight. I think the Society for Human Resources Management did a study about is DEI working, and it talks specifically about Black women in the workplace and how Black women are not coming back. Do you think that that's a problem for business? I mean, do you think they care if we come back into the workplace, or whether they're able to pull from the most highly educated demographic in the country?
So I think that I think a lot of the expectations are rooted and grounded in stereotype, and that sort of that expectation that Black women will stick and stay with a job because they absolutely, need this particular job, and banking on that fear that we won't leave, that we won't decide to be less afraid to leave a job without having another one lined up, leave a job and decide to launch their own consultancies. Over the last couple of years, I have seen Black women in my both social and professional network leave their jobs in droves because, frankly, tired of the microaggressions, tired of, I think, the over surveillance, over documentation, being monitored. If you're back 5 minutes late from your lunch break, you're being called to your manager's office, or being micromanaged. Even though we are the most educated demographic in the United States, there is still this stereotype of presumed incompetence. One other piece that I'd like to sort of add to all of this in the mix is this idea many of us were socialized and taught sort of in preparation into going into these work environments that we have to be twice as good to get half the credit. And it's exhausting. And yes, 58 cents to the dollar. Yes.
That's real. And those numbers are not. Good evening, Bonnie. Thank you for the listeners who are joining. I do see your comments coming through. It should not be lost that the statistic around women's pay, I believe the last data I saw, white women are pulling 78 cents to the dollar, and Black women are pulling 58 cents to the dollar, and Hispanic women are pulling 53 cents to the dollar. And that is to the dollar of the white male. And so even the highest educated demographic in the country is still working for 48% less than what her male counterpart is. That's an important data point that I think that people, the public or corporate America, keeps missing while they say that they are taking action. Do you believe that diversity is working inside these organizations? Do you believe internal DEI people can help make this change?
So my answer is it depends. One thing though, before I answer that, I want to just highlight this point that I think the media completely overlooked. So last year in 2021, Equal Pay Day for Black women was August 3rd. This year, it's supposed to be September 21st. We're going backwards, right? And then just in terms of if DEI is working internally, I still think it depends on who the leadership team is, right? Because you can hire the DEI professional that has all of the experience, all of the background, all of the lived experience and knowledge, and not give them a budget, not give them staff to help carry out the work, and then the rest. And if they are sitting at the leadership team table, so the C-suite, so if they're the vice president of DEI versus a manager or director, sometimes the organization looks at that under-budgeted, understaffed, department of one and is looking to them to fix their diversity problem. And that's harmful in and of itself, because typically these positions are filled with folks who look like us, and other, Black and brown persons of color. And so we didn't create this system, but we're forced to navigate it. And then sometimes in organizations, you have folks looking at them to fix all of the problem. And so there was a term that was coined here. I first heard of it a couple of years ago. So not talking about a glass ceiling, but a glass cliff, where, you're setting up folks to fail in these untenable positions and just pushing them right off that cliff. And
I
so
have some observations. I share your observations. I will share something that I did today to go test what you were just talking about. So I sat down and made a list of all the major employers here in the Seattle area. And I start going onto their websites and I start looking at their executive teams. I started to see if anybody has put their money where their mouth is. I actually had them all laid out and I was going to show them on air tonight. And I thought it would be too much of a hassle for the producer to manage. But I did look at Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Starbucks. And so I was looking to see, have they diversified their C-suite? Very few. I think I only saw one Black woman out of those 4 companies that was actually sitting in the C-suite. They're still predominantly white men. And I would also add that those who were sitting in the C-suite, one had a DEI title. The other women-held positions are Chief Human Resources Officer. So if I looked at, because human resources can have the responsibility of DEI many times, those were filled with white women. Microsoft's chief diversity person is a white woman. And so my question, or my thoughts about, is progress actually happening? When I look at the percentage of Black people in the state of Washington, there's a 5% Black population. So from my perspective, we should have 5% or better representation in the C-suite where decisions are made, number one. And number two, the DEI positions should report into a chief executive officer if they value DEI and if they value people. And many times they do not. They're reporting into HR or they're coming down the rung. They're not actually in the positions of effective influence. And so that was an observation I made today, just going through all of these different websites. We have some questions coming from the audience. So let's bring a couple of those questions up so we can answer those. I didn't catch them while I was talking. Okay, how do you deal with those who have white privilege micromanaging this process? What are your thoughts, Stephanie?
That's an excellent question, because I think that's the rub, right? So DEI and anti-racism work and a commitment towards being an anti-racist multicultural organization, it sounds great theoretically, but then when you start talking about slowing down processes to bring voices into the room, as particularly around decisions that are going to impact historically marginalized populations, and trying to actually make better decisions, there is a tendency to go now, let's move. You're not moving this along fast enough. And so the decision really is do I have those conversations, right? Do I have those conversations with those C-suite leaders about some of the, I will say, workplace cultural norms, decision-making processes, et cetera, that are in fact not rooted in being an anti-racist multicultural organization. And then if you're an internal DEI practitioner, are you prepared for that blowback? Because sometimes there is reprisal when you start talking about things like false sense of urgency or arbitrary sense of urgency, or perfectionism or fear of open conflict. When you start talking about those things, people get nervous.
Yeah.
And then also, I think people get nervous when they start realizing, oh, we're talking about sharing power, and I'm used to having the power and making all of the decisions. So not only is it an ethical consideration, in terms of like your professional reputation and your job, you also have to consider what is the impact going to be on me? Like, am I going to experience reprisal? Am I going to be held accountable for not meeting DEI related strategic goals when roadblocks have been thrown up at me all year? And so it is really like being between a rock and a hard place if you do not have a supportive CEO or president, and if you don't have a supportive executive team, and if you don't have a C-suite team that actually holds their business lines accountable for the work.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to add to that because I think Tasha's question is interesting in another way too. When she asks, how do you deal with those who have white privilege micromanaging it? I would make a strong case that is about control. And what is happening with particularly white leadership who brings in the brown or black DEI, even as contractors, consultants, they want credit for success and they want to control what that DEI person says or does so that it doesn't push them. They don't want to be seen as part of the problem. So if we shine the light on where I often use the term, it's not just the what that we're dealing with, it's the who. And so you can't solve DEI issues without dealing with the problematic, I'll just say, middle management ranks full of white women who are hell-bent to get themselves to a higher level in the organization and want to control everything around them. So they will push the DEI people down, take credit for the things that play in their favor, and manage it in a way so that they are seen as the hero. And so I see that as a part of the whole challenge with DEI is that, particularly, look, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Microsoft, but how could you have a global company and have a top DEI job and then bring in a white woman to lead it when you've got companies all over? If you mean what you say, then you bring diverse people and stop leaning on gender as the vehicle to check the diversity box, because the gender box is what is propelling more white women into leadership positions and continuing to leave Black women behind. I believe I highlighted an article about the Black women being left behind that just came out. Daniel, did I send that to you to show to our audience? And then I'll hop to the next question because I see Sadia sent a question also. So these aren't just my opinions about Black women being left behind. There was actual study about is diversity working, and it is clearly stating about Black women being left grossly behind.
Can I add one more thing to this commentary?
Mm-hmm.
So I think my rub, where I think what's starting to get stuck in my craw more and more, and that is, can I not just see the vice president of DEI as a person of color? Can I start seeing the chief operating officer, the chief information officer, the CFO? And so just because one has a VP of DEI, I want to see more than that. And I think sometimes organizations think, oh, thank goodness, I've checked that box. I can say we've got some diversity because look at our vice president of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I will tell you that I have been in situations where I have experienced a leader being frustrated that they were being called on the carpet for not living up to their DEI vision and mission. mission and vision. And he publicly said, well, wait a minute, I'm doing something for diversity. I've hired all of you, and pointed to, folks that were on the senior leadership team to demonstrate, like, look what I did. And of course, that then calls into question all of our qualifications, right? Because now we're being reduced down to these diversity hires, and damn on, this master's degree I have, and, all these years of experience and being certified in human resources twice, I'm just the diversity hire.
Mm-hmm. We're gonna pick that up. We got to take a quick commercial break, but when we come back, I want to pick back up on the topic of where Black leadership is actually seen and how do we get Black people into other leadership positions. We'll be right back.
That up in Saks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yo.
I'm Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not deep frying a turducken in a closed garage, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Struggling to pay your mortgage? If COVID-19 hurt your job or your business, you may be eligible for homeowner assistance funds from the government. Call 1-877-894-4663 now or visit WashingtonHalf.org. That's WashingtonHAF.org. Because falling on hard times does not have to mean losing your home.
Hi, I'm Mac McGregor, the host of the You Can Make a Difference show, which airs live every Friday at 12 noon PT time. On the You Can Make a Difference show, we shine a spotlight on people who are doing amazing things to make a positive difference in our communities and in our world. We talk about what inspired them to do the work and what inspires them to keep going, how they got their start, and how you can, if it inspires you, plug into their work. We can all do something that makes a difference. So tune in every Friday at noon to the You Can Make a Difference show with Mac McGregor.
Rainier Avenue Radio presents All Music, All Day Saturday. Music, all day Saturday. This is Edwin Bailey, Bulldog Blue, Jazz from the Cabinets.
That's right. It's time once again for Jazz from the Cabinets with Big Poppy.
Star Time.
Thanks for tuning in. My name is Paul Pearson.
This is Star Time. Saturdays, all music, all day. Reggae Hour, K-Fox Night.
Looking for the perfect beat? Yeah, it's the beat of the box.
Fresh Juice, D-Money in the group.
Myself, D-Money.
Nice Ice Patron.
Taylor Hart.
This is Spencia, the Northwest Rap Game.
DJ Medina, Chad Cheddar, Northwest Rap Game.
Sergio Lacour's Love Line.
It's Sergio's Love Lines with Sergio Lacour. Go to the phone line. Tell them who we talking.
Sea Monster Radio, Mo Jam. It's your jam.
We're live. Welcome to Mo Jam Mondays. This is KZ of KZ Music Media. Caller Goddess for Mo Jam Mondays.
Just my opinion. God is inspiration. Music. All day and all night. Saturdays on Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Do you want to reach out to the Vietnamese community in Seattle? Just advertise in Người Việt Tây Bắc, that is Northwest Vietnamese News, the longest running Vietnamese language newspaper in our region. Go to nvnorthwest.com.
You are listening to Rainier Avenue Radio,
your community radio station.
That up in Saks, I favor Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yo.
Welcome back to HeartBeat Radio and Podcast this evening. I have a special co-host on with me, Stefani Coverson from Jamii Pae consulting firm is on with me. Let's bring her back in. I was listening to your last comments. I thought, boy, you are so spot on about what you were hitting on around brown and Black people only having the DEI roles. And I want to share a story because I want to emphasize the point you just made. Now, this goes back to 2015. I was in the first cohort that the UW did to get women on boards of directors, paid board of director seats, so publicly traded companies. And for people who don't know this, being in a paid board seat in a corporation is massive money involved. And so I took the first cohort, and they had one of the big headhunters at that time. I won't name them publicly, but they were teaching this whole class about what it takes to get on a board of directors. And so I remember raising my hand and asking the question, and I said, would you can somebody like me get into a paid board seat? And she said, what's your background? And I said, I'm an HR executive. And she said, absolutely not. And I said, why? And she said, because you don't have P&L experience, profit and loss experience. And so I said, but I have an MBA and I run my own business. So that is a profit and loss. Mm-hmm. How is it that, and people who are in the room are in nonprofits, and that's just a tax structure. They're still doing the same work. We still have insights into organization and people, and sit at leadership tables and have discussions about our finances. Why is that not considered adequate enough to get on the to be able to sit in a publicly traded company's board seat? Now they have started to come down a little bit on that hard and fast, but it's a valid point that if brown and black people are not on the profit and loss side of business, they are often, more times than not considered viable candidates to get on board of director seats. And they are oftentimes only holding back office jobs, HR, legal, finance, the support structure, not on the business side. And so it's continuing to hold us back. So I really wanted to make sure I added that to your comments, because they were spot on. We as Black women, we as women, we are being left behind and being denied even more access for earning opportunity because of that stereotype of only getting in the DEI jobs.
Absolutely. And I want to add that when I shared with my network that I would be joining you this evening, I had several colleagues, several Black and brown colleagues, reach out to me and wanted to make sure I shared this trend with you on DEI consultancy. And that is this. When they submit their RFP in negotiations with organizations to come in and do some DEI work for them, at the 11th hour, they're asked to bring in a white DEI practitioner. And I did a little digging on that, and I couldn't find any white DEI practitioners that, as kind of a requirement of the contract, or we really want to do business with you, but this is what we need, wink, wink. I couldn't find any instances of white DEI practitioners being asked to bring in partner with a Black or brown practitioner in order to do the work with these conversations or with these organizations. And it made me think, so is this because this provides validity to what these Black and brown DEI practitioners are bringing to the table? Or is this a way, do they see this as a way to make the message more palatable if it comes from someone who looks like the majority of their organization? And so in some ways, it really feels like it is repeating the hiring processes that we already have, where again, Black and brown folks are sort of being shut out of these positions and let that broken rung right between getting into leadership from individual contributors into management, or from entry and mid-level managers into the C-suite. And so it's really disheartening, right? And so should these organizations instead not be having conversation with their folks about, this work is not to make you comfortable, right? This work is not to make you comfortable. And also, how many times have Black and brown people in our organizations been the only one in the room? And, there was no care or concern to their discomfort. And so I just wanted to make sure to bring that forward, because I was specifically asked by multiple DEI practitioners of color.
I appreciate that you brought that forward. You realize you're speaking to a consultant who goes through that challenge herself. I have spent enormous amounts of time on my weekends when I'm asked to put an urgent proposal together, to jump through hoops to get the proposals in on my private time, and just to have my intellectual property in my proposals be received by them when they infer that they're going to do business with me. And then I hand them my stuff, and then they go silent, and they take my work and they hire a white consulting firm to do it. I've also resorted to, I'm just sharing this because I'm sure the people that you brought forward are probably watching the show. I've sent out I have white colleagues that I send things to ask them how will they bid this work and what would they charge on it, so I could see how they do it. I've asked them to be transparent. They give me their bids back. I'm just going to tell you, I'm blown away at what white consultants are able to garner for this work, because we as Black people are not getting anywhere near that kind of money that they're getting. And no one can ever say to me, I sat in a position of influence where I signed those contracts, consultant contracts, for years. I've seen what white consultants make. I've seen what white men make. Mm-hmm. We don't get anywhere near. And so they don't think we're smart enough to figure out, like, we know who, here in the Seattle area, we know who the DEI people are. We know who to go talk to, who to ask, what are you bidding? How are you doing this? Will you share this? We've shared a lot of information between businesses. It's, what is the word? It's an atrocity to what is happening to Black women and Black businesses. There's some statistics that show, it's a broader statistic, but it's about GDP spent on Black business in the year 2020 was 1.2 billion. And in a state that has a 5% Black population, that number should be 22 billion. So we have so much equity work that needs to be done. And from my perspective, business is still playing the same friggin' games that they've been playing for my 30 years that I've been doing this work. It's not progressing. Do you share that sentiment?
Well, I just want to amplify what you're saying, because I too, as a former chief HR officer, have also seen those contracts, right? And been a part of those RFP interviewing and selection processes. And absolutely, the disparity between what Black and brown business owners, when they're putting their hat in the ring, what they're being paid versus what white-led organizations are being paid, that disparity is wide. Mm-hmm. And I just think that it absolutely is an atrocity. And again, it puts you right in that that sort of conundrum of what do I say about this? How far do I push this? And where do I go, with this and having this conversation? And so it is just, I think, the compound of harm, right? That we, in essence, are in the space of putting our careers and our professional reputations on the line for calling BS on this, and then the experiencing of the reprisal, whether it is for an RFP, whether it is shady hiring practices, shady compensation practices, all of those things. Mm-hmm. And so it just, again, compounds the harm.
I have so many stories like, I'm never going to harm any people who share information with me, but I could name, if I named companies. I mean, I can tell you stories about me being confidentially handed a proposal from a competing firm, a white-owned firm, passed to me confidentially so I could see what they're bidding. And I was competitive with that or slightly under, and then having the decision maker look me in the face and say to me that my pricing was too high when he had no idea that I had actually seen the competitors. I could just tell so many stories. They think we're stupid and don't know the game that they're continuing to play. And they want our proposals in because because I want to talk about affirmative action also. There is a requirement if you are a company and you take public money, you take government money, then many organizations require that affirmative action plans are done where you have to report out how many people were in your candidate pool, how many people did you consider for these jobs, how many people were promoted. And so they take our work and our engagement with them to check that box to say we considered Cindy's firm, we considered Stefanie's firm, but we ultimately went with this because they were more qualified and the gig. That's how this is being used, and we are being denied access to any of that kind of earning power. I mean, it's real. I've heard it from many consultants as well. And then I look and talk to people who are coming out of the workforce, out of the workplace, who are beyond frustrated with they can't advance in their jobs that they're in. They check the boxes, and every time they do what is being asked of them and they meet the thresholds to be able to be promoted, the requirements change to have them do more and just continue to keep them oppressed. That happens. I mean, I had a conversation with a Black woman recently out of one of the big tech giants in Redmond who shared like 5 times how this happened to her from the same manager. And that same manager had been fired from that company before. And now that person is drawing major equity and has achieved a higher status in that company to do more harm to brown and Black people. So I don't know. Sometimes I just feel like throwing my hands up with all of it because we've been doing it for so long and it's very difficult to see any progress in this area.
Absolutely. And I just, again, want to amplify what you are saying. I think you're absolutely, spot on. We've probably seen same stuff, different day, different, all the things. I also want to add this idea that, I don't know, this cycle of harm, right? That I've had so many Black women talk to me, and I'm sure you're going to say, yep, same, had the same conversations where they cannot get recognized and promoted for the great work they're doing within an organization, right? And then the way to get that wage increase is after, 2 years or so, 2.5 years, go to another organization. And then this kind of repeatedly happens that they're only able to get increased wages and promotions by going to different employers every 2.5 years. And then what happens? There's that gatekeeping in HR. Well, this person is a job hopper. And so, there are flight risks. So we don't want to hire, we don't want to hire them, or there's a cautionary tale about hiring them. Well, if, there was pay transparency, pay equity, and those goalposts weren't moving, for those promotional opportunities, there may be some employee retention there.
I would
add, you're harmed on both ends.
And I would add, and I actually covered this a little bit in my book. I'm just going to pitch my book really quick to the listeners here. If you haven't seen or read my book, this is my book about crushing racism in corporate America. I talk about the other vehicle of harm is the behind the scenes blackballing that is going on with Black women. I've received those phone calls from people in my career, from other recruiters, headhunters, and HR people who make a phone call to this new company when they find out that you've gone there. And they plant the seeds, and they plant the seeds of incompetence, whatever they want to, whatever narrative they want to paint about you, that is being done by too many Black women, particularly here in the Seattle area. It is horrific how their opinions about a woman, mostly because they're insecure or jealous of that woman and what she is doing to another woman to try to take away her ability to make a living and earn money for herself. That vehicle, that network is why people are saying things or saying to me things like, I don't want to be employed anymore. I've had several people say, I'm done. Like, I don't want to be, I can't deal with these. I can't say on air what they refer to them as, but there is a whole slew of them in management positions in companies that are tearing Black women's lives apart. And so have you also heard or experienced I'm done. I don't want to go back into corporate America. I'm happy to just I'm happy to go here, move to, have you heard about how many Black women are actually leaving the country, looking at different countries to go to? They're so sick of what is being done to us here that they just don't want to deal with it anymore.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are several Black women in my professional and social networks who are currently expats, planning to be expat, launching digital businesses if they're not of retirement age so that they can work from anywhere, and researching those new, they're called digital nomad visas. Because particularly being the only Black woman at, say, C-suite level or senior leadership team is very, it can be very lonely and isolating. And then when you are subjected to the microaggressions from your colleagues, and I would say outright verbal assaults, you have people looking at you with pity or maybe a smirk on their face. And then sometimes you get those calls after the fact, oh, that was horrible, what so-and-so said or did to you, but, I didn't say anything. And sometimes those calls are even worse. And so, I've received a few of those, I don't even know if they're conciliatory calls, but, just compounds the harm, particularly as these folks, would say that they were allies, right, on the front end, and they're into social justice, but not willing to risk their social capital. And you thought they were your friend, or, at least a friendly ally in that workspace, and to get those calls. But yeah, I think the statistics, the data that we're getting, Black women are fed up. And Black women, to throw another kind of statistic out here, when we're talking about this return to the office, Black women are the least likely demographic that is excited about going back. Because you can microaggress me via Zoom, but you've got to work harder to do it. You can't put your hands in my hair, and sort of all of the other, intentionally mispronouncing my name, all of those other things that you would experience being in person. It makes it much more difficult to experience, or I would say the microaggressors have to work harder, right? Because we're in the privacy of our own home, in our place of comfort. And so just so much about the workplace culture has to change, because it is not beneficial to Black women professionally. It is not beneficial to us in terms of our health. I can think of various points in my career, like my hair is falling out, I'm on antidepressant and anxiety medication and having panic attacks all over a job, and nothing is worth that.
I think we've all, I know so many Black women, including myself, who have experienced so much trauma, and you called it stuff, because that's a polite way of saying it, but their stuff is beyond our ability to, like, it's killing us. It's killing Black women to stay in those toxic organizations and environments. I was going to ask the question before I do, because we're getting close to the hour here, because I actually have a call to action tonight. But do you believe that corporate culture will change? Do you believe it can change, and will it?
I think corporate culture has to change. And I think corporate culture is going to change kicking and screaming because the demographics of the United States are changing, right? And so pretty soon, white folks are going to be in the minority in the United States. And so with that comes all kinds of things that are just going to have to change. And I think right now, kind of what we are seeing is a cultural battle, sort of in protest of this shift. And we're seeing it not only in corporate and just in general workplaces, but we're also seeing it in the political landscape, right? And organizations are a microcosm of the larger society. And so this shift is happening. I think we are demanding that it happen. And, I think we're kind of in a cultural battle about it, but pretty soon.
Also what's happening at the same time, when you reference what's happening across the country, what we're also witnessing is how the people who are so egregious and harmful to other people are hardly ever held accountable for it. And so, I personally question, I hear you, and I do think that we are going to force it, what do you call it? The inflection is hit, the point we're at. And because we're at that point, they're going to have no choice but to do it, but not willingly, I don't think.
Absolutely. Right? No, not willingly.
And for Sadia, I want to acknowledge, because I don't know if Sadia, I saw your earlier comments about if they do have diversity, are the brown and Black people seen as leaders? I did see that comment. I just didn't get to it. And I do want to acknowledge, I saw your comment that you're crying on the bus every day headed home. And that is unacceptable, that we have people leaving work environments and have to go home in tears at night and suffer health conditions and mental health crises, while the mental health benefits are not improving inside of these organizations either, because I have been asking that question. Are benefits changing? Are we giving more BIPOC people time off to help deal with the mental pressure and the release of being around this kind of stuff 24/7? Have you heard of any benefits, by the way? Any organization changing or improving benefits to help with mental health issue? And can you answer that in 1 minute? Because I have 1 minute to close.
Not much. There are some, but not much. And I think mental health and self-care continues to be a kind of a taboo subject, right? And just compartmentalize, and whatever is going on, leave it outside the workplace. I think we're still there. So not much.
I want to, before I thank you and close the show out, I want to make a call to action tonight. Every now and then I might ask for something, but tonight I'm going to ask, yes, it is racial battle fatigue. Tonight I'm going to ask our listeners to do something, and I'm going to ask you to go out and get some feedback for me. Something's got to be done about this. And while I'm hosting the show and talking every week about progress for brown and Black people, I talk about it in business, I talk about it in politics, trying to aim that ecosystem. Really, the only thing that's going to get the attention is we're going to have to take the power, right? Like, you see it happening across. You see the unionizations happening in Starbucks and Amazon, and that people are just taking their power back. I want my flyer is falling down behind me here, and I feel like there's a spirit here in the room with me. I want to hear from you. I want to know if you are a brown or Black person and you are experiencing this in the workplace. I want you to shoot me an email at cindy@cindybright.com. I'm going to mobilize on this, and we got to do something about this, because the more we come together collectively as women and as brown and Black women, the more we're going to get our voice heard. And so there's power in numbers. I have some things I'm mulling over about how to do this, but I want to hear from you, and I want to know who your friends are. I want to know what companies you work in, and I want to know who your managers are. I want to know who the culprits are that are creating harm to us, to brown and Black women inside of business. And I also want to thank tonight, let me bring Stefanie back on here. I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show this evening and having this conversation. I hope that you'll come back on with me, because it's an important conversation that we need to continue to have. Thank you so much. I think we've shown your website for people. If you want to reach out to Stefanie for consulting, please reach out to her. She is definitely a woman here in the Seattle area tackling these issues. And thank you so much for being on here with me tonight. To our listeners, and for all of you who participated in this conversation tonight, thank you. Share this video, share this show, reach out to me, reach out to Stefanie. We are here to help move these issues forward. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
That up in Saks, our favorite Black businesses. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yeah. Yeah. Assuming I'm rooting for everybody that's Black. Yo.